The wagon wheels creaked slow under the weight of silence, dust rising behind them in little clouds that the wind didn't bother to chase. The woman tied to the back, wrists rubbed raw from rope, wasn't screaming anymore. She hadn't made a sound since morning. Her name was Elsie May Carter, and this wasn't the first time her voice had cost her. The first time she'd said no, she was 16. It had been a neighbor boy with fast hands and slower apologies. The town said boys would be boys, and Elsie learned then that saying no didn't mean anything unless someone listened. No one had. Not her mother, not the preacher, and sure as hell, not the men walking beside the wagon now with their eyes on the ground like they weren't part of this. It was near sundown. The gold light of evening slanted low through the cottonwoods, painting the dry land in soft lies. From a distance, someone might have thought it was a caravan headed west, a family maybe, or folks moving cattle. But up close, there was nothing gentle about it. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, dirt smeared up one cheek, and her lips were split from where someone's ring had caught her mouth when they backhanded her. The men didn't speak much, just now, and then one of them would spit or glance back to make sure she was still upright. She wasn't. Her legs had given out miles ago, and now she just dragged, knees bleeding, ankles twisted, head down. Nobody had come. Not from town. Not from the next farm over. Not even the school teacher who used to give her a biscuit every Sunday after church and look at her like maybe she saw something good inside. That's what burned most. Not the ropes. Not the bruises. But the fact that every person who could have stopped this had turned their back or told her, "You should have kept your mouth shut, girl." She hadn't. She never did. That was the trouble. It all started when the Danton brothers rode in to claim what they said was promised. A marriage arrangement. Land for union. Her father owed a debt, they said. Elsie didn't care what her father had promised. He'd been dead 5 years. She wasn't cattle. She wasn't land. And she wasn't going to marry a man who looked at her like a chore he didn't want to do. She'd said no. Not with a scream. Not with a fight. Just a quiet, even voice. No, then she'd close the door. They'd tied her to the wagon the next morning. Somewhere past that next hill, watching from the tree line, a rancher on horseback slowed his pace. His name was Silas Boone. Folks didn't know much about him except he lived alone, kept his cattle out near the North Ridge, and didn't take kindly to noise. People said he was hard, maybe even cold. But they didn't know about the day he came back from war and found his wife had died birthing a boy who didn't survive long enough to be named. They didn't see him ride out 3 days after burying them both, or the way his hand shook when he lit a fire come winter. Silas had learned not to look too long at people. Nothing good came from it. He passed through town only when he had to. Didn't stop to talk, didn't drink with the others. But that night, as he rested beneath a cottonwood and watched the dust line of the wagon crawl over the ridge, he saw something that didn't sit right. A shape, slumped and trailing, too still to be walking. He narrowed his eyes and stood in his stirrups. It was a woman, rope around her wrists, blood on her knees. Silas didn't move for a long while. Just watched, heart thudding like something heavy in his chest. He didn't know her name, didn't know who she belonged to. But the look of her, it took him back. Not to the battlefield, not to the blood or mud, but to the way his wife had looked, eyes wide and silent, when he'd held her hand as the life drained out of her. Like she hadn't meant to be there, like it wasn't supposed to end this way. He swung off his horse slow. No rush. He moved through the brush, careful not to snap a branch. Waited till the wagon came to a slow stop near the creek bend. He stayed just far enough not to be seen. There were 4 men, all armed, talking low about camping here for the night. One kicked at the girl with his boot and told her to sit up. She didn't. Silas felt the quiet anger rise up in him like a tide. Not hot, not loud, just deep and still and cold as river stone. He didn't pull his gun. Not yet. He wasn't planning to kill a man unless there was no other way. But he wasn't leaving that girl to rot either. He waited till 2 of them walked off to gather wood, and another went to piss behind a tree. Then he moved. He came in behind the last man, standing guard. A quick blow to the back of the head. The man dropped. Silas caught him before he hit the ground. lowered him soft. Then he knelt by the girl. "Don't scream," he said. She didn't. Up close, she looked worse than he'd thought. Her lip was torn, eyes swollen near shut, hair stuck to her face in streaks of dirt and blood. But there was a strange steadiness in her gaze, like she wasn't afraid anymore. Like the worst had already happened, and nothing else mattered. Silas pulled his knife from his boot and sawed the ropes free. She winced but didn't speak. He slid his arm under her shoulders, helped her sit. She leaned into him, barely able to hold herself up. Her breath came in short gasps, but her hands gripped his shirt with surprising strength. "We gotta move," he said low. "You ride with me." She nodded just once. Behind them, one of the other men shouted. Too late. By the time they turned, Silas was already lifting her onto his horse. She slumped against him. He spurred the animal hard and didn't look back. The sound of gunshots cracked behind them. One whizzed past his shoulder. The horse screamed but kept going, hooves pounding like thunder across the open plain. Silas didn't care where they went. Just away. Anywhere away. She didn't say a word. Not until the trees swallowed them whole. Not until the night came down heavy and the wind turned cold. Then, somewhere between one breath and the next, she said the only thing she could. "Thank you." He didn't answer, just held the reins tighter. And her, tighter still. The cabin wasn't much, just 4 walls and a sloped roof tucked against the tree line near the creek, but it was warm and it was quiet. Silas laid her on his only bed, covered her with a quilt his wife had sewn long before death, made everything feel colder. He didn't ask questions that night, just sat by the fire, watching it crackle while her sleep came in fits, her face twitching like she was still back there, dragged by ropes and shame. He knew better than to talk before she was ready. She hadn't spoken another word since "thank you," and he hadn't pushed for more. Some pain sat heavy in the chest. You didn't yank it loose. You waited for it to rise on its own. By the next morning, word had started spreading in town. For men had come into the saloon bruised and bloodied, swearing someone had stolen their wife-to-be. They didn't name Elsie, but everyone knew who they meant. The Danton boys were loud and well-connected. Their uncle ran the general store. Their mother taught Sunday school. The law wasn't going to come down on them. Not for a misunderstanding. Not for a girl like her. The first to hear the whispers was Ruthie Powell, a wiry woman who ran the feed store with her brother. Ruthie had a sharp mouth and a memory longer than a river. She remembered Elsie when she was 10, helping her ma sell berries outside the church gates. She remembered when her ma died of fever and how Elsie showed up at the church alone every week after that, hair combed and face scrubbed, like she still had someone to impress. Ruthie didn't like the Dantons. Never had. When she heard what they'd done, she didn't say much, just closed up shop early and headed up the North Trail. She knew where Silas lived. Everybody did, even if they acted like they didn't. Silas wasn't happy to see her. He didn't open the door wide. Just stood there, his jaw tight, arms crossed. "Just bringing bread and salve," Ruthie said, holding up a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Ain't here to poke." His eyes flicked to the cloth, then back to her. "Don't want folks talking." "They already are," she said. "Least this way you get bread out of it." He let her in. Elsie was still asleep, skin pale against the quilt, lips dry and chapped. Ruthie didn't say a word about her. Just set the bread by the fire and the salve on the nightstand. "She got anyone?" she asked finally low. Silas shook his head once. "She's not safe," Ruthie said. "I know. Dantons'll come for her. They ain't done. Not when they feel owed." Silas didn't answer, just looked at the fire like it might burn the thoughts out of his head. Ruthie left without another word. 2 days later, another visitor came, this one less friendly. Sheriff Jed Harmon rode up with his badge, shining too bright for someone with hands so dirty. He was young, only 5 years in the job, and already owned more land than sense. Folks said he owed his position to the Danton family, and from the way he knocked like he had something to prove, it wasn't hard to believe. Silas opened the door slow. Jed took his hat off, fake politeness hanging over him like a storm cloud. "Afternoon, Boone," Jed said. "Heard tell you been harboring someone who don't belong here." Silas didn't blink. Ain't harboring nobody. Just looking after what ain't yours." Jed tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. The Dantons say different. They would. Silas didn't step aside. Jed's eyes flicked past him, trying to catch sight of someone inside. "I'll need to talk to her," he said finally. "She ain't talking to you." Jed's jaw worked. "That's not how this works, Silas. You think you can just steal a woman from her fiancé and there won't be consequence?" She wasn't his. She was promised. Silas leaned in slightly, eyes narrowing. A promise made without a woman's say-so don't hold weight with me. They stared at each other for a long breath. Then Jed gave a thin smile and stepped back. "You're making enemies," he said. "Even out here. Won't be long before they ride up themselves." Silas closed the door. Inside, Elsie had heard every word. She didn't let on until later, when the sun dipped low and the shadows began to stretch across the cabin floor. That's when she finally sat up, holding the quilt close. "I won't be the reason you lose this place," she said quietly. Silas looked up from chopping firewood. "Not losing anything. They'll burn it down if they have to. Men like that don't stop." He walked over, sat on the edge of the chair across from her. "I ain't afraid of them." She held his gaze. "You should be." That night, she told him more. Not everything, but enough. Her father had owed the Dantons for a failed cattle deal. Before he died, he signed over a contract promising her hand to settle the debt. Her mother vanished after that. No one knew if she'd run or taken her own way out. Elsie had been fending off the brothers since she turned 18. They'd waited, circling like dogs. When she said no, they decided to make an example out of her. "You saved me," she said, voice low. Silas shook his head. "Did what was right. That's not the same thing." She didn't trust easy. Silas didn't expect her to. But there was a stillness between them that wasn't silence anymore. It felt like understanding. Elsewhere, the Dantons weren't sitting idle. Levi, the oldest, was the one with the smooth lies. He'd gone to the sheriff first, then the judge, claiming Silas had stolen Elsie by force, that she'd been mentally unwell, grieving her dead parents, and the rancher had taken advantage of her confusion. Levi played the victim too well. The townsfolk didn't know what to believe. Some kept quiet. Others started whispering that maybe it was true. Maybe Silas Boone, the reclusive war vet, had snapped. But there were others who didn't buy it. Ruthie kept talking to folks behind closed doors. A few of the older women, ones who'd seen what the Dantons were capable of, started to question the story. Even young Timothy Jakes, who'd once tried courting Elsie and had gotten his nose broken by Levi for the effort, was beginning to speak up. A quiet divide was forming. And while all that brewed in town, Silas and Elsie sat on opposite ends of the cabin too small for secrets. But there were still things neither one of them said. She didn't speak of the marks on her shoulder where rope had cut deep. He didn't tell her about the night terrors that gripped him when the wind blew just right and smelled like gunpowder and blood. But they saw those things in each other. A look, a silence, a touch too long by the fire. The kind of pain you don't need words for. One evening, while he chopped wood and she shelled beans, she said without looking up, "You're waiting for something." He paused. "What makes you say that?" "You flinch every time a horse comes up a trail." Silas nodded slowly. "I am waiting, but not for them." She looked up at him. "I'm waiting to see if you'll run," he said. She stared at him for a long moment, then dropped her eyes back to the beans. "I don't run anymore," she said. "Not after what they did." And just like that, they weren't strangers anymore. Not savior and saved. Not protector and burden. Just two people sitting in the same storm, trying to find their way through. Outside, the wind picked up. Far off, a hawk cried into the dusk. In town, Levi Danton poured a drink for the sheriff and said with a slow grin, "Time to smoke the bastard out." By the time a full week passed, the hills no longer felt like they were holding their breath. The air grew tense, even in silence. Silas noticed the small changes first. How the birds quieted near dusk. How hoof prints showed up deeper near the creek. How firelight from his cabin flickered too long after dark like it was being watched. He didn't say anything to Elsie, but she already knew. She'd lived too long on instinct to miss the signs. She stayed near the cabin, moved carefully, and always looked out the window before stepping outside. They were both waiting, and the waiting was a kind of war. The Dantons weren't patient men. When words failed, they turned to threats. When threats failed, they leaned into violence. They started with Ruthie. It happened on a Sunday evening. Ruthie was locking up her store when she saw smoke from the back storage shed. Before she could react, the flames climbed fast and high. By the time someone helped her put it out, half her inventory was ruined. No one saw who lit it, but everyone knew. She showed up at Silas's cabin the next day, her skirt covered in ash, hands blistered, eyes sharp. "They're making their rounds," she said as she paced his porch. "This is them sending a message." Silas stood still. "What did the sheriff say?" She barked a laugh. "Jed said it was an accident. Maybe I left a lantern lit. I haven't used oil lamps since the spring, and he knows it." Silas didn't respond. His jaw clenched, eyes staring past the trees like he could see the Dantons on their way. Ruthie looked through the cabin door, where Elsie sat stitching an old shirt. "You better decide soon," she said under her breath. "They're circling tighter now. It's her they want, but they won't stop at just her." Silas nodded. He knew. The truth was he'd been walking through two plans in his head for days now. Run or fight. Neither one came without a price. He wasn't sure which he could live with. That night, they heard the whistle. It was faint off in the trees. Elsie froze in the doorway while Silas stood slowly and blew out the lamp. They waited. Another whistle answered from the other direction. Then footsteps. Not close, not charging, but close enough to rattle nerves. Silas grabbed his rifle and motioned Elsie toward the trapdoor behind the stove. "I won't leave you up here alone," she whispered. "You won't be. I just need you safe. I'm not hiding. You're not dying either." He didn't raise his voice. That was the thing about Silas. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. She saw it in his eyes. He meant every word. So she climbed down. By morning, nothing had happened. No attack. No confrontation. Just footprints near the tree line. A show of power. A way to say we can get close when we want to. That's what made it worse. Later that day, the twist came. Silas rode into town. Not to shop. Not to warn. But to see someone he hadn't spoken to in years. His older brother, Caleb Boone. Caleb ran a livery stable and kept his nose clean, but he had ties to the old rancher network that stretched across the plains. The kind of men who'd seen war and loss and didn't care much for laws written by rich families. Caleb didn't ask why Silas came, just looked at him long and said, "You're a skin for help." "That's new." Silas shook his head. "Not for me. For her." Caleb rubbed his jaw, squinting. "You in trouble. They're gonna burn it all down if I don't hand her over." Caleb's mouth tightened. "What did she do?" Said no. Caleb cursed under his breath and sat down hard. After a long silence, he looked up. "You're not gonna like what I'm about to tell you." "Say it anyway." Caleb leaned forward. "I know something you don't. The Dantons. Levi's not after her just cause of that promise. He's got a bigger reason. That land your girl was raised on. Her father didn't just own money. He hid something the Dantons are real keen on." Silas frowned. "What?" Caleb lowered his voice. "Railroad gold." Silas blinked. "That's just a story. Not to them. Word is, during the war, her father intercepted a payroll shipment going west. Buried it somewhere on that land. He died before he could cash it out. Levi thinks Elsie knows where." Silas didn't say anything for a long time. He stared at the floor, running that new truth through every memory he had of Elsie. Her quietness, her fear, her stubbornness. "She don't know," he said finally. "If she did, she wouldn't be sitting in my cabin sewing rags." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but they think she does. And that's why they'll keep coming." It shifted everything. Silas rode back different. His stomach twisted, not just with anger, but confusion. Was Elsie keeping something from him? Was her story only half true? That evening, when she looked up from the hearth and smiled, he didn't smile back. She noticed. "What is it?" she asked. He sat down across from her, staring hard. Is there something I should know? Her smile faded. What do you mean? I went into town. Spoke to Caleb. She stiffened. He told me your father was tied up in railroad theft. That he had gold. That maybe you knew where. Elsie didn't speak. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Is it true? He asked. She stared into the fire. I didn't know it was gold, she said slowly. I knew he buried something. I thought it was papers. Or maybe debt records. He made me swear never to tell anyone. Why didn't you say something? Because you already had enough reasons to risk your life for me. I didn't want to add more. Silas stood up, pacing now. You should have told me. I was scared, she said, voice rising. Not of you. Of what they'd do if they knew, I remembered. You still remember where it is? Yes. He stopped moving. Then it's worse than I thought. I didn't lie, she said quietly. I just held it back. Because I didn't want to die for something I never asked to be part of. He looked at her, and for the first time, she looked small. Not because of what the Dantons had done, but because he saw the weight she carried and how much it had cost her just to survive. I'll dig it up, she said. Take it to them. Maybe they'll stop. No, Silas said firmly. You give them what they want, they'll just want more. So what then? She asked, exhausted. We wait for them to burn us alive. No, he said. We give them a reason to fear us. That night, Silas rode back to Caleb and sent word through the network. By dawn, 5 riders came in, old hands from the war, men who didn't care much for outlaws who wrapped themselves in lawman smiles. They camped in the woods behind Silas's land, hidden but ready. The next few days passed in a quiet tension that settled in the bones. Elsie didn't sleep much. Silas kept his rifle nearby. The 5 riders sharpened knives, repaired saddles, and waited. Then the trap was set. Elsie went into town alone. The moment she stepped off the horse, whispers swirled. The sheriff spotted her and moved fast, but she was already inside the church, where half the women in town had gathered. Ruthie sat up front. So did Mary Hollis, the baker's wife. They stood up before the sheriff could open his mouth. She's with us, Ruthie said. Jed looked stunned. You think I care if? You better, Mary said, standing tall. Because there are 10 of us here, and we all know what you've done for the Dantons. The women didn't raise their voices. They didn't have to. Their stillness was stronger than any shout. Jed turned red and left. Outside town, Levi Danton had gathered his brothers and a few hired guns. They rode at dawn, sure they'd catch Silas alone. But as they crested the ridge, they didn't find a quiet cabin. They found 5 armed men flanking a calm, waiting rancher. Turn around, Silas said. Levi laughed. You think a few old dogs scare me? You don't know what kind of dogs we are. A pause. Then one of Levi's men turned his horse around. Then another. Levi's mouth tightened. She's mine. No, Silas said. She never was. A moment later, rifles cocked. Levi thought better of it. He rode off. By the time Elsie got back to the cabin, it was over. Silas was sitting on the porch, rifle across his knees. She stepped down from her horse, face unreadable. They're gone, she asked. For now. They'll come back. He nodded. Maybe, but they'll think longer next time. She sat beside him. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything, she said. He nodded. I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. They didn't speak for a long time after that. Just watched the wind move through the trees like maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. But both of them knew better. Out here, peace was a brief guest, and truth always carried a price. The morning after Levi rode away, the sky turned gray, heavy with clouds that hung low over the ridges. It wasn't just the weather that changed. Something had shifted between Silas and Elsie, something deeper than silence and older than fear. They spoke less, but the quiet had weight now, thick with the things they didn't know how to say. Even the sound it was splitting out back seemed harsher, more deliberate. The threat hadn't passed. It had only stepped back to sharpen its teeth. Inside the cabin, Elsie tried to resume a rhythm, boiling water, mending shirts, feeding the fire, but her hands moved slower. She still hadn't forgiven herself for keeping the truth about the gold hidden. And though Silas never once raised his voice, the way he looked at her had changed. Not colder, but more distant, like he was thinking too much, measuring every choice they had left. They both knew the Dantons weren't finished. By the end of the week, Caleb Boone arrived on horseback, his face drawn and grim. "They went around the law," he said as soon as Silas met him outside. "Petition the judge to label her mentally unstable. Claim she's dangerous. Claim she wandered off with stolen property and needs to be returned to family care." Silas's blood went cold. "They trying to commit her?" Caleb nodded. "Already got papers signed. They're coming with a wagon. Gonna haul her out like a lunatic." Inside, Elsie stood at the edge of the door, her shoulders shaking. "I'm not crazy," she whispered. "You're not," Silas said, stepping inside. "But that's not what they care about. They'll lock me in some place," she said, voice barely holding, "and they'll dig up the land. Or worse, they'll say I died and no one will ask questions." He didn't deny it. He didn't lie. They spent that night planning again. The difference now was the clock. It was no longer about surviving. It was about choosing the right hill to die on. They couldn't run. The order was legal. They couldn't shoot their way out without drawing blood that couldn't be undone. There had to be another path. Something no one expected. That path came from Elsie herself. She pulled the small leather ledger from beneath a loose floorboard, something her father had hidden away before he died. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside were names, numbers, and one map. Roughly drawn, ink faded but clear enough. "I think this is it," she said, pointing to the markings near the ravine west of the property. "This is what they're after." Silas studied it. "If we give it to the judge, they'll say it's fake, that I forged it to protect my thief of a father. But if it gets into the right hands," Caleb added slowly, "it might prove what Levi really wants. That it was never about her being unstable. It was about what her father left behind." Still, it was a long shot. Silas rode into town the next morning with the ledger hidden under his coat and handed it to Reverend Thomas, a quiet, watchful man who had once taught law back east before losing his family to cholera and turning to faith. The Reverend had seen through men like the Dantons for years, but had never acted. Now, with evidence in his hands and a woman's life on the line, something inside him stirred. "I'll read this aloud on Sunday," he said, in front of everyone. "Let them see the truth with their own eyes." Silas nodded, but his gut twisted. It was a gamble. If the Dantons caught wind of it before then, they'd make their move early. That night, Silas and Elsie sat on the cabin steps under a sky just starting to drizzle. The air smelled like wet earth and fire smoke. "You don't look at me the same," she said quietly. He turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Since I told you about the map. Since you found out, I kept it hidden. I can feel it, like something broke." He hesitated, then said, "It didn't break, but it changed." Her face fell. "I don't blame you," he went on, "but I'd be lying if I said it didn't shake me. Not because you had secrets. Hell, I got plenty. But because I realized I don't really know how deep your hurt runs. I thought I did. Thought I could carry it. But maybe I underestimated how much it shaped you." Elsie looked away, tears brimming. "I wasn't hiding it to lie," she said. "I was hiding it because it felt cursed. Like anyone who touched it died. My mother. My father. Maybe me next." He reached for her hand. "You're not cursed, Elsie. I feel like it." They sat like that until the cold chased them inside. But the next morning, before dawn, hoofbeats shattered the silence. A wagon. Several riders. Caleb burst through the cabin door. "They're here early. Sheriff, too. They brought men from the state hospital." Elsie went still. "I'm not going." Silas loaded his rifle. "You won't. But this time, it wouldn't be a standoff with guns. Not yet." Silas stepped out onto the porch just as Sheriff Jed dismounted. The wagon was covered, waiting. Men in gray coats with blank eyes stood nearby. The Dantons flanked the sheriff, smug as anything. "You have no right," Silas said, voice low. "I've got a signed order from the county judge," Jed said, waving the paper. "It says she's a danger to herself, that she needs care. She's more sane than any man here. Levi stepped forward. She's delusional. Believes her father buried treasure. Runs wild with lies. She needs help. Elsie stepped outside then, slow but proud. Then why are you all so scared of me? Levi froze, caught off guard. Elsie looked at the sheriff. You put me in that wagon, and it won't stop with me. You'll answer for it. Not now. Not here. But people talk. People remember. And God doesn't forget. Silas handed a copy of the map and the ledger. Caleb had made duplicates to Jed. Read it, he said. Or don't. But it'll be in the Reverend's hands by Sunday. Your name's in there too, Sheriff, alongside Levi's. Jed looked uncertain now. He glanced at the Dantons, at the gray-coated men, then back at Silas. This is your only chance to walk away, Silas said. Because if you take her, it won't be quiet next time. There was a long, trembling pause. Then Jed turned and said, We'll revisit this after the judge reviews the ledger. Levi lunged forward. You coward. Jed cut him off. Enough. The wagon rolled away. Elsie sagged slightly, relief and fear mixed in her bones. But inside the cabin, the damage was done. She barely spoke for 2 days. Silas kept watch, checking the windows, pacing the edge of the property. He couldn't shake the feeling something else was coming. That something came in the form of betrayal. One of the old ranchers, Jeb McCall, who'd been among the riders who helped defend the cabin weeks ago, had taken a bribe from Levi. Enough money to rebuild his broken ranch and keep his sons fed. He didn't ride out with guns. Just slipped into town, dropped off a letter to the Reverend with a corrected version of events, claiming Elsie had lied, that Silas had staged it all to steal land. He even claimed the ledger was forged. The town turned quiet again, suspicious. The church fell silent. Elsie heard the whispers, in the mercantile, in the alleyways. Silas tried to shield her from it, but she heard them anyway. Maybe she's cursed. Maybe she drove her own mother mad. Maybe she killed her father for the gold. The pain didn't come from the lies. It came from how quickly people believed them. Silas found her one morning at the edge of the creek, the ledger in her hands, about to throw it in. Stop, he said. Why? She said, eyes hollow. It's poison. It's truth. No one cares about the truth, Silas. Not when lies are easier. He stepped forward, gently taking the book from her. You care? That's what matters. But I'm tired, she whispered. Tired of being hunted. Tired of having to prove I'm worth saving. You don't have to prove anything. Don't I? He pulled her close, pressed her head to his chest. I didn't take you in because you were broken. I did it because you didn't bend. You stood, and you keep standing, even when no one believes you. She wept then, not from fear, from release. The next day, the Reverend called for a town meeting. He stood before them, ledger in hand, and read every word. Names, numbers, transactions, land grabs, the Dantons' fraud, and one note, written in Elsie's father's hand, that said, This gold was never mine. It was meant to build railroads and lives. I feared what it would do if found. It broke the town's silence, and it forced every person there to look at Elsie not as a problem to bury, but as someone they had failed to protect. But even that kind of justice comes with cost. The Dantons weren't finished, and neither was the storm. The rains came that night, not just a drizzle, but a hard, unrelenting downpour that turned the roads to sludge and made the world outside the cabin blur with gray. Thunder rolled low in the hills, and lightning flickered in the distance like a warning. Silas and Elsie stood at the windows, watching. The Reverend's reading had lit a fire in town, but fires had a way of burning everything, good and bad. Half the townsfolk had come forward after Sunday's sermon, murmuring apologies or support, offering bread or blankets. The other half stayed silent, or worse, watched from doorways like they were waiting to see who survived the fallout. The Dantons didn't show their faces for 2 days, but everyone knew they would. Caleb Boone returned from a long ride with news that chilled Silas to the bone. Levi's gone to the state marshal, Caleb said, his coat soaked and voice grim. told them Elsie confessed to knowing the gold's location, that she was planning to sell it to outlaws. He's painting her as a threat to federal property now. Elsie sat stiff on the bench by the fire. She didn't react at first. Then she said, very softly, "He means to get me locked away no matter what the story is." Silas cursed under his breath. Caleb didn't disagree. "They might believe him," Caleb said. "That ledger's strong, but it don't outweigh politics. And if they believe she's dangerous, they won't wait for a trial. They'll take her straight to the territorial prison." "They won't touch her," Silas growled. "Then we better make a decision. Tonight." The words hung heavy. Elsie stood slowly. "I'll go," she said. "Not to them, but to where the gold is." Silas turned sharply. "No, I'm tired of hiding," she said. "Tired of living scared of men like Levi. If I show them it's real, if I bring it to light, maybe it takes away the lie he's built." Silas's jaw tightened. "Or it gives them exactly what they want. I won't let them decide who I am anymore," she said. "I'm going to that ravine, with or without you." Silas stared at her. The fear in his chest wasn't about the gold. It was about losing her, to bullets, to betrayal, to the weight of all the things no one should carry alone. But in her face, he saw no fear. Just resolve. Just that same quiet strength that made him first believe she was worth saving. He nodded. They left before sunrise. The ravine lay west of her father's old land, half choked with brush and half swallowed by erosion. Only Elsie knew where the markers were. A twisted cedar, a flat black stone, a rusted piece of iron hammered into a stump. They dug for hours. Rain still fell, light but steady. The earth was heavy, hard to move. But just before noon, the shovel hit something solid. A wooden box, weathered and split in places but still locked. Inside, beneath a thick cloth, were stacked coins and marked payroll bills from war. Railroad property, lost for decades, worth enough to build a town or destroy one. Elsie stared at it like it might vanish. Silas let out a breath. "You were right." She looked at him. "This doesn't save me." "No," he said, "but it tells the truth." They loaded the box onto Silas's mule and headed back, silent most of the way. They weren't sure what they would do with it yet. Hand it to the marshal, leave it at the church, bury it deeper somewhere else. But Elsie had chosen her path, and that mattered more than what came next. They reached the cabin at dusk. The door was open. Silas dropped the reins and ran inside. Everything had been turned over. The table broken. The mattress sliced open. Ink spilled across the floor. But it was the blood that froze him. A small trail near the back wall. Someone had been hurt. "Elsie," he said, barely breathing. "I'm here," she called from behind the barn. He ran to her, found her crouched over Caleb, bleeding from the stomach, pale as ash. "They were waiting," she said. "Caleb came to warn us. They jumped him." Silas dropped to his knees. "Hold on, brother. Hold on." Caleb coughed, blood on his lips. "They took the gold." "Who?" Silas asked, but he already knew. "Levi. Jed too. They said they'd bury the evidence. And you both with it." Caleb's hand gripped Silas's once hard. "Protect her." Then it went slack. Elsie covered her mouth. Silas sat stunned. Another man gone. Another cost. And Levi still breathing. Something broke inside him. Not rage. Not revenge. Something colder. That night, Silas rode to town. He didn't sneak. He didn't whisper. He walked into the sheriff's office and dropped Caleb's bloodied shirt on the desk. Jed stood, startled. Behind him, Levi leaned against the wall, smug. "You gonna cry?" Levi said. Silas said nothing. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the last piece of the map Elsie hadn't given them. Without it, the treasure would be useless, nothing but weight and risk. "You want it," Silas said. "You'll come for it yourself, but you'll do it where I choose." Levi raised an eyebrow. "You setting a trap?" "No," Silas said. "I'm setting a grave." Levi laughed, but Jed was less sure now. "What are you playing at, Boone?" "You'll see." Silas walked out. Back at the cabin, Elsie stood over Caleb's body, wrapped in a blanket. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "I should never have dug it up," she said. "No," Silas said. "We should have finished it when we had the chance. But we will now." The next day, they set the stage. The ravine where the gold had been found became the meeting place. Word spread quick, too quick. Silas wanted everyone to know. If they were going to go down, it wouldn't be in silence. They were done hiding, done fearing. The truth would be dragged into the light, no matter what it cost. By noon, half the town had followed. Some came curious. Some came hoping to stop it. But no one left. Levi arrived with Jed and 2 hired guns. They didn't expect the crowd. They didn't expect the Reverend either, standing firm beside Silas with a rifle in hand. "You kill him now," the Reverend said, "and everyone will know why." Levi sneered. "Let them." Elsie stepped forward. "Here I am," she said. "You've chased me for years. Lied about me. Hurt people who try to help. But I won't run anymore." Levi laughed. "You're not going to shoot me, sweetheart." "No," she said. And then the Reverend raised his rifle and fired. He didn't shoot Levi. He shot Jed. Jed went down with a scream, clutching his leg. It was the signal. In the trees, the old ranchers Caleb had called before his death came riding in. The rest of the town stepped aside as shots rang out. One of Levi's men tried to run and was stopped by a bullet to the shoulder. Levi, wild-eyed, tried to reach for Elsie, but Silas was faster. They fought hard, fists, not guns. The old way. Levi was younger, but Silas was stronger, steadier. Every blow he landed carried the weight of everything Levi had taken. In the end, Silas stood over him, bruised and breathing hard. "You kill me," Levi gasped, "and it all falls back on you." "No," Silas said. "You'll live, and you'll stand trial, and you'll watch this town remember what you really are." The townsfolk didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They carried Levi away in silence, like a funeral before the grave. Elsie knelt beside the ravine, where the empty box sat open, proof of a truth no longer buried. The gold would go to the railroad, the map to the press. The lies would rot in sunlight. That night, she and Silas sat beside Caleb's grave. "You believe in you," Silas said. "I didn't deserve it. You do now." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "I'm not fixed," she said. "I'm still scared." "So am I," he said. "But we can be scared together." She smiled then, tired, broken, but real. And for the first time in a long time, they both believed in tomorrow. The wind settled after everything. Not all at once, but little by little, like the land itself was learning how to breathe again. The cabin, still scarred from the Danton search, stood quiet in the soft gold of early morning. Rainwater had washed away the bloodstains from the porch, but the memory lingered in the grain of the wood, just under the surface. Elsie sat on the steps wrapped in Silas's old coat, her eyes on the trees. They'd buried Caleb behind the barn, near the cottonwoods, where the land sloped gentle and the soil stayed soft. She visited the grave each morning now, not with flowers, just silence and thanks. There were no more enemies at the gate, no more threats in the night. But peace didn't feel like relief yet. It felt like the edge of something new, unsteady, unfamiliar. Silas rarely left her side those first few days. He repaired the cabin by hand, board by board, not saying much, but always near. He'd lived his life believing that justice was just a word, something men like Levi bent to their favor. But watching the town finally turn, watching them choose truth when it cost them, had changed something in him. He didn't say it out loud. Didn't need to. The change was in how he looked at Elsie now. Not like a burden, not like someone he had to protect, but like a partner. Someone who'd stood when she could have run. Someone who still did. The railroad sent men to claim the gold 2 weeks later. They shook Silas's hand, thanked him, promised a small reward for Elsie. She turned it down. "That money didn't belong to me then, and it doesn't now," she said. The land her father once fought to keep would be deeded back to her name, quietly, without public fuss. A clerk handled it. She didn't even go into the office. Just signed a paper and went home. There were still whispers now and then. A few people said she was a witch or a liar or lucky. But most saw something else now. A survivor. A woman who'd faced ruin and didn't flinch. The children in town stopped crossing the street to avoid her. Old women nodded when she passed. And Ruthie, with her cracked hands and sharp tongue, started showing up with bread again. No questions asked. Silas asked her once, out by the creek, if she ever thought about leaving. All the time, she said. You ever will. She looked at him and shook her head. I think I'm finally somewhere I can stay. He nodded, then handed her a piece of wood. Your half of the porch needs mending. She smiled and got to work. They never said what they were, husband and wife, or just something steadier. Love, when it came, wasn't like a fire. It was like a fence post driven deep in dry ground. Quiet, dependable, something that held. And in time, she laughed again. Years later, when a new family moved into town and asked about the quiet woman who walked with the rancher every Sunday morning, someone said, "That's Elsie. She was tied to a wagon once for saying no. But she lived, and the wind carried the truth farther than the lies ever did."